it's known throughout the higher level trafficking community that their leadership for their paramilitary wing are 4 former U.S. Special Forces. You've got a Green Beret
U.S.
a Green Beret that's Delta Force, 2 Navy SEALs, and a Ranger from the 75th Ranger Regiment. Those are the leaders.
Oh, man. Hold on. I'm from the 75th Ranger Regiment. Obviously, the president deemed the cartel as a terrorist organization. And what are some of your thoughts on that alone?
I think that it was a wise move because Trump is clearly setting up a negotiation and he's manufacturing bargaining chips he's going to use with the Mexican government. That way he can agree to suspend the terrorist designation in exchange for the Mexican government doing what he wants. Essentially, he's going to be getting something for nothing. You know, Trump is a very astute negotiator. With respect to the terrorist designation, it's not going to impact cartel operations in Mexico one bit.
Really?
Now, of course.
Why is that?
The men are already all looking at life sentences. Whether it's life sentence for Foreign Kingpin Act violations or terrorist organization operations, life is life. They're not going to, you know, there's a phrase in Spanish called another strike for the tiger. Well, you can only get so many lives.
Yeah, so interesting. So in their head, it's they're damned if you do, damned if you don't. They're going to get in trouble either way, whether it be for a terrorist organization.
Now on the American side, it's very interesting because seeing how they only operate out of 3 distribution hubs and a logistical hub east of the Mississippi, you need trucks, tractor trailers. Well, now those drivers providing material support. That's a 20-year mandatory minimum. So you're going to be able to squeeze the low-level operators, the people manning the stash houses, the people that are running the local distribution hubs, the people that are running the local courier services. So it's going to create a tremendous amount of leverage for the American prosecutors to squeeze the American side of the operations. It's also going to put at jeopardy a lot of the money laundering operations because banks are don't want to get hit with moving terrorist money. And so, had this been done 20 years ago, it really would have impacted their money laundering operations. Today, it's mostly through China. So again, it's not going to really impact that aspect. But the individuals that are physically collecting the bulk cash, they're now participating in terrorist-related activities. So they're going from 30-month sentences to 20-year sentences. And so you can see how it's going to create a tremendous disruption on the American side of the operations if our government plays it wisely.
Did you see the other day a video came out from one of the cartels mentioning that they have no intentions of creating any harm in America?
They have a zero tolerance policy for any violent acts in the United States. They do not target police. They do not target law enforcement. They do not target judges, prosecutors, witnesses, even cooperators. The only thing you can do in the United States to engender an act of violence is theft. Everything at that level is at the consignment level. So if you have a 200-kilo account, they expect you to come back with their $3 million. If you rip them off, they'll come see you. Short of that, there are no sanctioned acts of violence in the United States on behalf of any cartel organization. Now, if you set a man up, his brother might come see you. His cousin might come see you. That's a personal beef. That's not cartel organization sanctioned. So a lot of times you'll see where you'll have a personal issue, but because the guy's operating on his own, they conflate it and attribute it to the cartel organization. Whereas in reality, they have zero tolerance for violence against federal law enforcement in the United States or in Mexico. American police officers, untouchable in Mexico. American civilians, untouchable.
Really?
Yes, sir. 5 years ago, there was a group, the American government accused Sinaloa because there was a family in Sonora that was unalived. Terrible situation. Well, Sinaloa controls that border, but you have other groups that are their competitors. Well, it was the competitors group that unalived that family.
So are we talking about the family that was the LDS community?
Yes, sir.
We had one of the family members on this show.
Yeah, that wasn't Sinaloa. That was the group out of Juarez that's challenging Sinaloa for control of that plaza. So Sinaloa went, not only was it not Sinaloa, but Sinaloa went and unalived that entire group. And yet the American government still blames Sinaloa. They're like, what are you talking about? They're like, it wasn't them. And they handled it for us.
Yeah.
So
What is the reason for that? I guess for that choice for them not to, which it's great to hear by way of I spent a lot of time on the borders, but what was it initially that created that, like, hey, there's never a green light on America?
There are only a handful of rules, and the stringent is no attacks upon American law enforcement. And that stemmed from back in the 1980s. The predecessor group was a structure called the Guadalajara Cartel. And the leadership within that group unalived a federal agent named Camarena. And it provoked such an enormous response from the American government that it ultimately fractured the Guadalajara Cartel, giving rise to the modern cartel structure. The reason, 40 years ago, Sinaloa, Sonora, Juarez, TJ, they were all local franchises of the larger Guadalajara group. So when they decapitated the leadership of Guadalajara, all those little franchises became standalone cartels. And so the men that were in charge back then, Chapo Guzman was in his 30s. Well, all the men that experienced the onslaught of pressure from the American government, because now we were sending bounty hunters into Mexico snatching guys up. There's 100 men in prison in the United States associated with the Camarena homicide. Most of them they didn't even know what happened. You got guys getting arrested in Juarez for a homicide that happened in Guadalajara. It was just indiscriminate picking people up. And so the reaction was so strong that the proverbial do not do anything to awaken the slumbering giant. Stay away from Americans at all costs.
You mentioned in the email, and I would love to circle back to this, says, what are some of the biggest challenges the United States military would face if deployed against cartels in Mexico?
There are fundamental differences between the cartels, and I can speak only about the Pacific side. I don't speak about the Gulf side. But on the Pacific side, Jalisco New Generation is much more militaristic. Sinaloa prides itself on being clever. So they're going to adopt a posture where they'll just take a lower profile. The group out of Jalisco is the more militaristic group, and it's known throughout the higher level trafficking community that their leadership for their paramilitary wing are 4 former U.S. Special Forces. You've got a Green Beret, a Green Beret, that's Delta Force, 2 Navy SEALs, and a Ranger from the 75th Ranger Regiment. Those are the leaders.
Oh, man. Hold on. I'm from the 75th Ranger Regiment.
Yes, sir.
Oh, my goodness. I've never heard this before. So the top 4 for the CJNG.
Yes. Yeah, because, the guy that, when the Jalisco was part of Sinaloa, they were operating under the aegis of a drug lord named Nacho Coronel. Well, Nacho Coronel controlled Jalisco. Coronel's partner was Lobo Valencia. One of the Valencias is married to Mencho. So Mencho had the family connection, so he's ostensibly in charge of the group that at the time was called the Mata Zetas, the Zeta Killers. Well, he handled the money because he was a family member. They had the American Special Forces handle the actual building of their paramilitary. So they recruited former Mexican Special Forces, which is the next tier of leadership. Their main body is former Mexican military personnel, and then they bolster it with Special Forces from Central American countries, Honduras, El Salvador, Panama. These are all guys that come to the United States. They get trained by our guys at Bragg. They get trained at the School of the Americans in Georgia. And counterinsurgency type training. And so when they go back to their countries and they finish their tour of service, they get paid top dollar. Remember, Jalisco New Generation generates $3-4 billion a year. They can afford to pay these men top dollar. And so when they broke away and formed their own structure, the Mata Zetas became Jalisco New Generation. It's essentially a military wing that got involved with drug trafficking. Whereas Sinaloa was always drug traffickers that built a military wing. And so that's why you see where Jalisco particularly have had numerous encounters against the Mexican military. And one of the main concerns that I have is, look, the American military is the most powerful fighting force in the history of the world. We have career bureaucrats, however, who formulate plans that, quite frankly, aren't reasonable given the nature of the adversary you're fighting. We spent $2 trillion and 20 years fighting in Afghanistan. We didn't lose a battle in Afghanistan. But yet today, the flag of the illiterate goat herder is flying over every flagpole in that country. But there's a reason why we lost. And it's not the military's fault. It's the career bureaucrat. The guys that go to the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, they're not qualified to come up with plans when the adversary is a functionally illiterate Mexican with a second, third, or fourth grade education, any more than they were qualified to do so with an illiterate goat herder in Afghanistan. So now the guys that are putting together these plans, they're already talking about collaborating with our partners in the Mexican government. Are you insane? You did an episode earlier about a gentleman named Hernando Garcia Luna. Hernando Luna was their Minister of Public Safety, their FBI director. Do you realize that 5 of the men in Calderon's cabinet split $270 million? We're not talking about crooked cops in Tijuana or in Matamoros. There's plenty of them. We're not talking about crooked military officers at the airbase in Sonora where they're landing the 737s. We're talking about cabinet level officers. The American government entrusted Luna with $4.5 billion over a 3.5-year period. They mobilized 5 military campaigns, 65,000 Mexican soldiers. And who was driving the entire time? The jackass is sitting up in the mountains of Sinaloa. Luna would ask, who do you want us to go get? I go get them guys in Michoacan. The gringos are paying for everything. Then 4 months later, Luna comes back to D.C. George Bush is praising him, saying this is a man of courage, strength, honesty. We finally have a partner in the war on drugs. He got paid $50 million from Sinaloa, jackass. You guys are cutting checks, giving them helicopters, tanks, troop transports. They initiated 5 military campaigns: Operation Michoacan, Operation Baja California, Operation Juarez. They went into Tamaulipas twice for the Zetas and the Gulf. Guess who didn't get an operation? Sinaloa. Because they paid the $270 million. So when you're talking about having military troops coming into the United States, if you're partnering with the Mexican government, how do you know that information is not going to get leaked? So when our men are going on their missions, they don't have the element of surprise. Their air assaults, they're dropping into ambushes planned by American Special Forces, supported by Mexican Special Forces. Twice the Mexican government has sent their special forces to try to get Mencho. On both times they got tipped off. On the ground assault, those soldiers went right into the ambush. They unalived every one of the Mexicans and left their bodies on the highway. Jalisco suffered not one injury. The Mexican government got so pissed off, they put together their most sophisticated elite unit of special forces. They were doing an air assault. Well, once again, one of the officers on the base called and tipped off his handler. Mencho and his men got into their SUVs and they were taking off. Here come the helicopters. They can see the caravan. They get into formations. They start descending. What happens? They start blowing helicopters out of the sky. They have SA-7s. They have man-bads. They've demonstrated the capacity to blow military helicopters out of the sky. Every one of the special forces on those helicopters died. So if you're going to send our boys into, and look, one of my best friends is an Army Ranger, 2 combat tours in Afghanistan. He said they were dropping into air assault. They were dropping into ambushes all the time. The Taliban didn't have inside info. You have to assume the Mexicans are going to know our guys are coming. That's a very different picture. So now if you say, well, we're going to cut out the Mexicans, well, even if you don't involve them with the info, where are you going to park your helicopters? You know, you see on YouTube, all these people talking, we're going to rotate our forces out of Texas. If you're going to go get Mencho's in the mountains of Jalisco, Michoacan. That's 1,200 miles from the border. You're going to fly a helicopter from Fort Bliss, 1,200 miles on 1 tank of gas? Drop off our men, circulate above, pick up our boys, and bring them back? That's 2,400 miles on 1 tank. Dodging rockets the whole time. And they know you're coming. And so it's not going to be the picture that's being presented is very flawed. You have almost nobody of any significance at the border. Sinaloa cartel doesn't have 25 guys at the border. Their highest ranking guy in TJ is an E9. He'll have 3 importation cells that report to him. They're led by E7s. The workers are E6s and E5s. That's it. Nobody in the leadership, nobody in the United States, they don't put their important people at risk. So you're not going to be going over the border and fighting cartel men. There's lots of criminals in TJ that are locally contracted. Sinaloa will sacrifice every man in Tijuana. They don't care. Jalisco will sacrifice every guy in Mexicali. They don't care. But if you're going to actually target the cartel operatives, you got to go 1,000 miles into country and fight them in their mountains. And their military wings are, like I said, special forces trained, American special forces led, using American special forces tactics.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard me talk about Firecracker Farm and their hot salt. You probably heard other people talk about it as well. If you haven't tried it yet, let me just tell you, you're missing out on some serious flavor. Their hot salt is delicious, and it really makes pretty much anything that you put it on even more delicious. It's hot, but when you use it in moderation, it's not too hot, and the flavor that it adds enhances without overpowering. It is handmade, super premium, and comes in awesome stainless steel push-button grinders like the one I have in my hand right here. You can take them anywhere. Hot sauce, if you've had this experience, can very easily overpower other flavors and always runs out quickly when it's good. Hot salt lasts and lasts. The push grinder holds over 500 plus pumps, and when you consider the refill it comes with, it's thousands of servings, and it's a great deal and a lot cheaper than the sauce. For those of you that like flavor but hesitate because it might be too hot, you can mix it with sea salt to tone it down and still enjoy the awesome flavor. In my personal experience, you can modulate how much comes out of the dispenser. You're in total control of the amount of heat you serve yourself. So if you would like to support our show and give Alex and his family business a shot, head over to firecracker.farm and use the code Ironclad to get a 15% discount on your first order. You will be very glad that you did. Firecracker.farm.